Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And in our ongoing series on Medal of Honor winners, tonight we're going to talk about Charles Liteky, who died recently at the age of 85, also known as Father Angelo Liteky. And he is a unique Medal of Honor winner because he was the first Medal of Honor winner to give his medal back. And I'll tell his story and let you judge whether you thought his actions were right in giving back the Medal of Honor. Charlie Liteky was a nice Catholic boy born in Jacksonville, Florida. He was the quarterback at Robert E. Lee High School. After high school, he became an Army chaplain and was sent to Vietnam at the height of the war. In December of 1967, about 2 months before the Tet Offensive, the North Vietnamese were probing the area around Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, in Bien Hoa Province. Father Angelo Liteky found himself in the middle of a firefight, and that is where he distinguished himself and earned the Medal of Honor. He was awarded the honor along with 4 other soldiers in the East Room of the White House in November of 1968 by President Johnson, 2 weeks after the election where Richard Nixon became the President of the United States. And President Johnson was quite somber that day because the peace effort was not going anywhere and the Democrats had just lost the White House. Here is the Medal of Honor being conferred on Army Chaplain Liteky on November 19, 1968.
Secretary Rizzo will now read the citation. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress March 5, 1863, has awarded in the name of the Congress the Medal of Honor to Chaplain Angelo J. Liteky, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. On December 5, 1967, Chaplain Liteky distinguished himself while serving with Company A, 4th Battalion, 12th Infantry, near Phuoc Lac in the Republic of Vietnam. Company A came under intense fire from a battalion-sized enemy force. Observing 2 wounded men, Chaplain Liteky moved within 15 meters of an enemy machine gun position to drag them to the relative safety of the landing zone. Inspired by his courageous actions, the company began placing a heavy volume of fire upon the enemy's positions. Chaplain Liteky began moving upright through the enemy fire, administering last rites to the dying. Noticing another trapped and seriously wounded man, Chaplain Liteky crawled to his aid, rolled on his back, placed the man on his chest, and crawled back to the landing zone. He returned to the action and came upon a man entangled in dense underbrush. Intense enemy fire was directed at him, but Chaplain Liteky calmly broke the vines and carried the man to the landing zone. Chaplain Liteky stood up in the face of hostile fire and personally directed medevac helicopters into and out of the area. Despite painful wounds in the neck and foot, Chaplain Liteky personally carried over 20 men to the landing zone for evacuation. Through his inspiration and heroic actions, Chaplain Liteky saved the lives of a number of his comrades and enabled the company to repulse the enemy. His outstanding heroism and inspiration were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Army and reflect great credit upon himself and the armed forces of his country.
Well, that's only the first chapter in the Charlie Liteky story. After signing up for another tour of duty in Vietnam, in 1971 he gave up his vows of celibacy and then left the priesthood. In 1975 he moved to San Francisco where he didn't know anybody. He married a woman who had been a nun and also gave up her vows of celibacy, and he was now known as Charlie Liteky. His wife introduced him to families of El Salvadoran refugees who had been tortured and killed by the U.S.-backed government, and in 1986, in protest of American actions in Central America, Charlie Liteky left his Medal of Honor at the Vietnam Veterans War Memorial in Washington, D.C., along with a letter to President Reagan. After that, he and several other veterans organized a 46-day hunger strike as part of the protest. For the next decade and a half, he protested against the U.S. Army School of the Americas, an academy at Fort Benning, Georgia, where the U.S. Army trained soldiers from Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. He was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison in 1990 for entering the school without permission and splashing its rotunda with his blood. In 2000, he spent another year in federal prison for his actions against Fort Benning. After leaving the federal prison in Lompoc, California, In 2003, he traveled to Baghdad to protest American military involvement in the Iraq War. He wrote up anti-war statements and gave copies to arriving American soldiers in Iraq. He spent the rest of his life organizing peace groups and public protests. As the only one of the now nearly 3,500 awardees of the Medal of Honor since the Civil War who has returned it, he did not regret giving back his Medal of Honor, except for the fact that it carried what amounts to an $1,100 monthly pension in today's dollars, and he had to forego that. Some of his Vietnam comrades were radically against him and never forgave him, and others, while they didn't agree with him, understood why he did what he did. After he and his 4 compatriots received their Medals of Honor in that November 1968 ceremony at the White House, President Johnson concluded his remarks thusly.
Someone said some time ago, how many of these things has the president awarded? And that caused me to reflect a little bit about these things, these Medals of Honor. There are some 4.5 million people that make up the defense of this country, military and civilian. And in the history of the Congressional Medal of Honor, there have been something like a little over 3,000 awarded. And this president has awarded, I believe, less than 30. Out of 200 million Americans, I have awarded only 30 Congressional Medals of Honor. And to these modest men who never thought that they would be here any more than I ever thought I would be where I am, I want to remind you of what another president said upon another occasion, that I'd rather be able to have that blue band around my neck with a Congressional Medal of Honor than to be the President of the United States. That is an honor that is not accorded to the President, although he occupies the honored position formerly held by Blackjack Pershing and formerly held by George Marshall. General Westmoreland, their brilliant commander, cannot wear that blue ribbon. It goes to a very select and special group of men, and you are a part of that group. So to you and your families, on behalf of all the people of this country and the free world, you have sought to protect and whose freedom you have tried to ensure, I say we thank you and we're grateful to you. And we are proud of the honor that the Congress has authorized be conferred upon you. I hope and I believe that your efforts will not be in vain. And as long as Americans love their liberty and revere their freedom, they'll owe a very special debt to you men who wear that blue ribbon.
Let me say 2 things about those remarks. First, he referred to General Westmoreland, who was at the ceremony, as their brilliant commander. Sorry, William Westmoreland was not a brilliant commander. It was his stubbornness and his strategic folly that was in large part responsible for the defeat of American forces in Vietnam. Second, although Lyndon Johnson was dead a long time when Charlie Liteky gave back his Medal of Honor, I would give anything to know what he would have thought of that gesture. Just from my vantage point, it appears to me that Charlie Liteky could have done all the protesting that he did without giving back his Medal of Honor. While I understand the gesture, it seems to me to be an affront to all his fellow Medal of Honor winners. His point would have been made just as dramatically. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Taps. In case you're wondering, after he left the medal at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, it was retrieved by the National Park Service and placed in the collection of the National Museum of American History. Well, it's hard to know what to make of Charlie Liteky, so we're going to close tonight with a little bit of the funeral movement from Prokofiev's Lieutenant Kijay. We played the Troika when we did the Greg Lake podcast. In the story the music is based on, which is a satire by the way, Lieutenant Kijay was a fictional officer. He never existed. He was made up by the Russian military bureaucrats, and he kept getting promoted by the emperor. When he finally made the rank of colonel, the emperor requested to see him. The Russian military bureaucrats, instead of admitting there was no Lieutenant Kijay, said that he had died, whereupon the emperor was reported to have said, "That's too bad, he was such an excellent officer." This is the final movement, the funeral of Lieutenant Kijay.